Hey everyone, Mako here, and today, after a week of posting absolutely nothing, I'm back with an opinion video instead of a game review or retrospective.
You suck!
Hey, don't boo at me. I actually have a reason for it. You see, because I started posting more frequently and not only posting videos on more popular topics like Battlefield 6 or KF3, but also the ones that are less popular like 13 and Prince of Persia, I started thinking about why I enjoy these games. And by the way, if you haven't, go and watch the 13 and Prince of Persia videos later. I've poured a lot of thought into those. But yeah, I came to a couple of conclusions, and one of them will be the topic of this video. Specifically, I want to talk about the identity of games and how much having an identity and a specific niche within a genre impacts gaming. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. Obviously, I do not think that I need to explain what a niche is, but I believe that identity deserves a short explanation. So let's start with a definition, shall we? What is identity? Identity is the unique set of characteristics that can be used to identify a person or a thing as themselves or itself and no one or nothing else. What does that mean exactly in our case? Well, that means that a game's identity would be certain characteristics, like for instance specific mechanics or even artistic style, some spin on the genre that makes the game stand out, one might say the core of the game. Having a specific identity would also mean that the game focuses on what makes the game good, or at least focuses on specific aspects of the game. That would obviously mean that whenever you think of a certain game, you can instantly tell what is the game about, thus identifying it. Also, on the other hand, adding too many characteristics to the game, or increasing the amount of features but at the same time not focusing on anything specific, can lead to a game losing its identity and muddying the waters in regards to defining what the game is actually about. And when you think about it, having that identity and niche is what creates player bases. You can have a very generic game that is just solid and appeals to very many audiences, but in general, the way that this goes is whenever your game stands out in terms of its vibes, niches that you focus on, and the identity, the core of the game, that is when you build a fan base and a player base of the game. That is when the game can become successful. In fact, I would argue that when you look at a certain title, and if somebody were to ask you, what is this game about? What do you do? If you are able to tell someone specifically, okay, so in this game you do this, and that is the gameplay loop. That is way more helpful than doing something like, you can do whatever you want and wherever you want. Because when someone is looking for an idea about whether the game is for them, I think they're looking for some specifics instead of being told that they can do whatever, which is a very broad term. And then, when it turns out that they in fact can't do something that they wanted to do, that could lead people to not being happy with said title and leaving negative reviews, telling their friends that they didn't have fun, and leading to, essentially, a downfall of a game, because people would just get a wrong opinion on the game. And to reiterate what I just said, I can call upon one recently successful studio. Arrowhead Studios and the words that were written on their website. A game for everyone is a game for no one. You see, that quote summarizes why having an identity and a niche and a core for a game is so important. That is also why Helldivers 2 was so successful. It aimed to do a specific thing and nothing else. And that is exactly what players were buying Helldivers 2 for. But hey, if you liked the video so far, leave a like, leave a comment, a sub. I read every single comment and I try to put out frequent videos. Some of them are opinions like this one, and some of them are reviews or retrospectives on games, and I appreciate every single one of you giving me a chance and watching this. Now, back to the video. So, I will give you a couple of good examples of having a game identity being a good thing. Let's start with Satisfactory. When you think about Satisfactory, you think about a chill game about building factories and optimization. And that is its identity. Those are the aspects that Satisfactory is very much focusing on. Having a very curated map of infinite ore and oil on deposits make it so you, as a player, do not feel stressed out about having to constantly fix your logistics chains. Because you are running out of ores or need to move the factory somewhere else, the only time you rebuild your factory would be whenever you would try to scale, or if you'd want to optimize the outputs of the said factory or make it prettier. And now imagine that you have a game like Satisfactory and you add base defense elements to it. Monsters would spawn more often, let's say at night or from certain spawn points on the map, and would attack your factories, effectively destroying buildings. Well, now you are starting to think about something more akin to Factorio, which, while similar, still is a game that focuses more on ever-expanding logistics chains and defending one's base against aggravated by pollution bugs, rather than optimization and building nice factories, because in Factorio a player just does not have time to make things pretty and giga-optimized on site, meaning that there is a huge focus on creating mining outposts that would feed everything to a main ever-expanding factory there. And I would say that whenever you can compare a game to another game one-to-one, this is not a good thing. But when you have two games within the same genre whose identities are different, I would say that just adds variety and value. Therefore, Satisfactory and Factorio, I'd say, are good examples of games that focus on their niche and their identity. Another example of identity would be a game that I've talked about on this channel, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, but also the Warrior Within and Two Thrones games apply. These are some of the most impactful and important platformers for the platforming genre. And that sentence is exactly what describes Prince of Persia. Platformer. The games focus mostly on platforming sections, which were, let's be honest, revolutionary for the platforming scene at the time. If you thought about a game that focused mostly on platforming, you were thinking about Prince of Persia at that time. And even though Warrior Within and Two Thrones focused a little more on combat, they still had really good platforming sections that also were being expanded upon. And on top of that, Prince of Persia spawned another franchise that up until recently had its own very specific niche and identity. I'm obviously talking about Assassin's Creed. But since I'm planning to make a video on AC at some point, I think I'll hold off on it, specifically because there is more to it. But back to Prince of Persia. The new release, The Lost Crown, also is considered to be a very solid game with some difficult but also solid platforming as well as decent combat. Although in 2 dimensions instead of 3, but still, developers who made The Lost Crown clearly paid attention to what made old Prince of Persia games great and stuck to it instead of making it a different game. And just to give one more positive example of identity being important, Devil May Cry games. What is there to say? When you think about DMC, you think about over-the-top main characters, mainly Dante and his shenanigans, but also Virgil with how brooding and cool he is whenever he so much as moves a muscle. You think about some very stylish and smooth combat, as well as insane combos. And because of these things and how solid the games were, except for Devil May Cry 2, they have gathered a cult following. I do think that whenever someone wants a more light-hearted hack and slash game, they think of 3 games, but even then everyone can tell the difference between each one. They think of Devil May Cry, they think of Bayonetta, and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. And yet, funnily enough, these 3 games were kind of made in the same developer circle, considering how the original Devil May Cry and Bayonetta were created by Hideki Kamiya, and then also Bayonetta and MGR Revengeance were both made by Platinum Games Studios, so here's a fun fact for you. Now, let's follow that up with an example of identity crisis. And I'm talking about Call of Duty. Now, hear me out. If you think really hard about it, what used to be Call of Duty's strength and identity? Well, compared to other military shooters like Battlefield, COD actually had a really good single-player campaign. And on top of that, Call of Duty was leading in smaller scale multiplayer lobbies. While it obviously was capable of creating some large lobbies for up to 32 players or something, its biggest focus were smaller sized lobbies like Team Deathmatch, etc. And then what started happening? In COD World at War, a zombies mode was added, so now the player base was split between people who mostly played single player, people who did go for standard PvP multiplayer lobbies, and people who played mostly the PvE zombies multiplayer. Now keep in mind there was still some overlap between these three, because with having 3 separate game modes you can still somewhat balance that. So every single one of them was decent. And that was still fine, I guess. But then, on top of that, Warzone, the Battle Royale, was added on a wave of Battle Royale popularity started mostly by PUBG and Fortnite. Now COD had a split between people who wanted a good single-player experience, standard multiplayer lobby for PvP, PvE zombies mode, and Warzone. And not only is the player base split, the focus of the game devs is also split because each of these game modes requires different things, ultimately watering it all down to one successful game mode that cannibalizes its own player base. And then, obviously, ultimately Activision had to focus on one aspect of it, and they chose Warzone as the focus. And with popularity of a free-to-play game mode came microtransactions. Ergo came more money, and nowadays, because of that whole identity crisis, Call of Duty releases are essentially glorified paid patches for Warzone nowadays, which is even treated as a separate game. And yet, the recent yearly releases still give us half-baked stories and very mid zombies mode, and on top of that, a really imbalanced, in a bad way, multiplayer mode on top of Warzone and all that microtransactions that come with it. And then one of the biggest failures when it comes to filling an identity and stretching too thin, Killing Floor specifically. Now listen, I've already made an entire video on KF3 alone explaining everything wrong with it, and also some things that I commended Killing Floor 3 for, but there wasn't a lot. So let's just focus on its identity and niche it was filling. And what was again? Oh yeah, Killing Floor always had satisfying gunplay, both in the way that combat felt and the way that the guns themselves felt. The way they were reacting and reloading was always very satisfying. That's one of the things that most people who play Killing Floor mention. On top of that, you had a wave-based zombie, or Z if you want to be precise, shooter that was very much focused on team play and synergies between perks, and all that was filled with British references, in-jokes, culture, etc. And again, like I said in my video, all that is missing. The gunplay is at best mediocre. The classes do not synergize whatsoever except for needing a medic in the lobby, because team play is gone, with being able to use syringes on teammates also gone, and well, the Britishness is almost entirely gone if it wasn't for a clone of Mr. Foster. So not only are its identity and core mismanaged, it also is being stretched thin by adding unnecessary features like battle passes and operators, or gathering resources during the game to craft RNG attachments for said weapons. And when you look at all of it, you can clearly see that Killing Floor 3 is not well received, and I would say that's a major factor, because you can see that in case of Killing Floor, if you look at the live player charts, Killing Floor 3 dipped very fast, and Killing Floor 2 has in fact on average 3 times the amount of players that Killing Floor 3 has. Even Killing Floor 1 gained a little bit of players after the release of Killing Floor 3. So based on the examples above, both positive and negative, I think that I'm making a pretty good and convincing point to make games that focus on specific niches, audiences, and keeping their identities to appeal to people who are the core audience for a game after all. Because what is the point of watering down a game or adding so many new unnecessary features to the point that the identity gets slowly washed away? If you lose your core audience and risk putting out a game that wouldn't have a player base and try reaching for a new potential players who are exactly what I said, potential, not something that is almost guaranteed. And when you create a game that is just a gray blob of different game modes and mechanics, one is bound to take over, and then most of your audience might just leave. Therefore, I would suggest to any game dev or a game producer or director who might watch this video, which I doubt there are any, I don't have any reach whatsoever, to stop trying to fill a game to the brim with new things and focus on the things that are being done well by your games. And if you were to expand on anything, expand on said things and don't just slap on new things hoping to appeal to a new audience. Remember, when you create a game that has a certain focus, a game that's good at what it's supposed to be good at, people will come. Remember what Arrowhead Studios wrote on their website. A game for everyone is a game for no one. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about this, so if you guys enjoyed this video and you lasted till the end, please leave a like, a comment and a sub, and I hope you have a very nice day. Bye bye.